Olga, you're an incredible human being. You've written books that are very valuable. You've got websites and you're a teacher. And you have impressed me enormously. And I asked you to do this interview so that we could share your stuff with my audience, which is a very intelligent audience that is also increasingly, and to my great surprise, spiritual. I'm not quite there as a spiritual person, but I'm getting there. And I think I'm attracting people like you that are very much spiritual gurus. So before I ask you any questions of substance, please just tell us a little bit about yourself, your where you were born, your education, your major books, and your areas of emphasis.
Well, I'm originally Irish. I'm still Irish, but I'm also Canadian, having lived there for a long time. I lived in Switzerland, I worked for the UN, and I've done many different things in my life, but I'm essentially an educator. I've been a journalist, I've been an editor, I've been a book editor, I'm an author. I'm a disruptive thinker. I'm very dedicated to getting to the deeper truth about what's going on in our world, but really mostly about what's going on in us as human beings. So as a therapist, which I've been doing for the last 30 years, working with people individually and in groups, I specialize in human dynamics and in understanding and working with and transforming the negative subconscious programming that runs and often ruins our life. So that has been a huge eye-opener for me and a wonderful doorway for my clients and myself to find a higher way of living and to in fact take ourselves back to kind of our original blueprint and shed some of that negative programming that really cramps our style and stops us from having the life, the health, the freedom, the autonomy that we seek.
You know, that resonates with me because I've been, I think, in practical terms, a terrible father, husband, and man over the last 68 years. And although I'm trying to be better, you can't recover the lost childhoods of your children. So it'll be interesting as I absorb some of the stuff that you're communicating, because I'm not giving up on me. I've got another 20 years. But I would say to everybody in my generation, it's not too late to start. And Olga might be the right starting point. So how have we arrived at this point in our evolution?
Well, I normally take people back to a much earlier time just to give us context for what's happening in the world right now. So I go back to what I call the first takeover, which has taken us very directly over 1700 years, however, to this tech takeover, where we're on the verge of being robotized on our humanity. Well, we've been basically dehumanized on many levels. So when we are run by and dependent on, being controlled by an inanimate, soulless, heartless technology. So I want to take you back to the early 300s to explain how we got here and to give people context for understanding why things are the way they are now. So if we go back to that time of our early ancestors, in the time of Roman Emperor Constantine, who wanted to have a lot more power over the people. And they were an unruly bunch. You know, they were pagans who were considered to be very licentious people. They loved kind of the whole sensual world, which sounds like...
They also loved Mother Earth. They respected...
Yes, exactly. They were very connected to the land. And then the more intellectual classes were extremely enlightened. They had universities of higher learning and metaphysics. They were very enlightened. They knew how to co-evolve with the living cosmos. So they were also very connected to nature. They understood sacred geometry and, as I said, metaphysics and the esoteric sciences, out of which today's kind of more basic science has evolved.
But if I could name three, astrology, symbology, and numerology appear to be very important.
Cosmology. Yeah, they were experts in cosmology. So they understood how the world worked, how reality worked, how you could actually manifest reality. And they worked with natural phenomena to make that happen. They had their own rituals, they had their own understanding, and they had a very direct connection to universal intelligence, consciousness. I don't know what they would have called it back then. Probably not God, but anyway, that seamless unified field into which we can all connect, and that unifies us all, interconnects us all.
So what happened to break us down from there to today?
So when they decided they wanted more power over the people, they brought in the early church state. And the church state was allowed to basically convert the people brutally, I mean, ruthlessly, horribly, massacred people who wouldn't convert. And so our ancestors were forced to accept, to accept an alien doctrine. Now I say alien in the terms of it being foreign to their beliefs, not from some other planet. They were told that they were sinful, unworthy, that they needed an external authority to guide them, to run them, to save them, basically.
Yeah. Why are things getting worse, not better? But I sense it will end up with a happy place at the end.
Okay. So I have to say, as a result of that indoctrination that happened, our ancestors were taught to reject themselves. They were left with low self-worth, low self-acceptance, which wasn't an issue before. They were very self-sufficient, very dependent, very autonomous. They had spiritual autonomy. They didn't need anybody on the outside to tell them how to live. So that out of that low self-worth and low self-acceptance, it bred self-rejection. So it was out of that we got a lot of self-sabotage, we got guilt, we got fear, we got shame, self-doubt, insecurities, a whole slew of negative programming and beliefs that undermined our sense of self.
And as a result, at some point, forgive me for interrupting, but at some point you get to The Manufacture of Evil, a great book by Lionel Tiger about how industrialization broke the bonds between individuals, their families, and their communities and made them cogs in a wheel. I want to move you fast in this interview.
Yeah.
Forgive me, I don't mean to be rude, but it's what I do because of briefing presidents.
So the point I'm trying to make is that since that time, we have progressively disconnected from who we really are. We've lost touch with the power that we have, that we are actually creators, that we have phenomenal higher faculties that we can use to create our reality. So instead, we have become submissive. And because of the fear that was generated, the terror in people back then, we now very readily submit. We've been taught to fear and defer to an outside authority. So here we are in this situation now, having disconnected from all that wisdom, not knowing that we've been deeply programmed and that our psyche is deeply pervaded with this negative thinking, this rejection of self, which has led to self-destructive behavior, including behavior towards the planet. So we are actually destroying the planet, defying all logic and reason as to why we would do that, because we depend on it for our survival. But our programming will always override any compelling argument to protect the planet.
Because it's that. Tell me about programming. I mean, we're programming people through Hollywood, through the media, through the schools, through political oration, through the disenfranchisement of 70% of the public from elections. So how does Olga go in and take over programming and make it better?
Well, when I work with individuals, I look at their life and I can tell from their circumstances what their programming is. So I can do that, or I can just talk to them.
Dare I ask?
Well, if we look at crises around us right now, crises are the symptoms of human dysfunction, which is caused by our negative programming. That's all they are. But because they're symptoms and we're just dealing with symptoms, we're never addressing the root cause. And we're not getting down to what's really driving all of this, which is the human dysfunction. So things are getting worse. We're getting more disease, we're getting more depression, more debt, more awful stuff happening that we cannot fix if we take the symptomatic approach. So when I work with people...
I want to ask you a high-level question and then come back to your theme. I'm an expert on the deep state. Okay, so the Vatican, the City of London, the Rothschilds, the Queen, the satanic pedophiles, and they are all treating war and disease and poverty and environmental degradation as profit centers. A lot of environmental degradation happens because corporations are not complying with the laws that the government passed, to which only lip service is paid. So I think a lot of this disaster is contrived, not just humans. So from where I sit, Olga's magic is getting the 99% to understand that the 1% are killing them and programming the 99% so they step off the plank and take over again. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. But here's what I'd say, Robert. The bad guys are not the problem. The bad guys are an inevitable outcome of an environment that is so dysfunctional and so deeply programmed that it enabled their presence, them to thrive. And it stopped us from thriving. So you could get rid of all the bad guys And it wouldn't heal human dysfunction. It wouldn't change us. You can also elect a president democratically or otherwise, and it won't change us. So, yes, you can point the fingers at the bad guys. And one of the things that we were taught to do, our ancestors were taught to condemn and judge. And here we are condemning like never before, pointing fingers at who has done this to us and how
Your
much
Honor,
we
I
are
plead
victims.
guilty. I plead
I've done my fair share. I've done my fair share of that.
Let's pretend I'm talking to President Trump on the 14th of February. What do I tell him that sums up Olga's vision for making America great again through deprogramming? You've got 3 minutes.
It's getting back in touch with who we really are, understanding that we have the power to generate our own reality. And this is proven through quantum physics. We have our own electromagnetic field. We now know that our thoughts are electric, our emotions are magnetic. We are always transmitting. So it's about becoming conscious of that, getting back in touch with our spiritual faculties, our higher faculties, our creatorship, and transforming the negative programs that are getting in our way and distorting the self, stopping us from thriving in life, from ever having what we want, self-rejecting, self-destructing. That's what we need to fix. And we have the capacity to do that if we are willing to go back to self-responsibility and really reclaim our autonomy. Because autonomy and freedom, these are not things that a government can give us. We have to claim them for ourselves.
You've just earned another 3 minutes with President Trump. And he's going to say, well, did I do okay in taking out 5G? Are there any other electromagnetic invisible rainbow things I need to deal with?
Well, again, they're symptoms. These are all the symptoms of, the fallout from this deep human dysfunction that we need to fix. So we're seeing on the outside absolutely everything that is missing in us. So we have radiation coming at us, we have destruction happening on many levels, yet we have our own EMFs, our own electromagnetic field that we need to start using to understand that it's not the EMFs coming at us that, yes, of course, we need to get rid of those. We need to reduce the harm that's happening, but we need to power up. We need to understand our own electromagnetism and start making it work for us. So it's about consciousness, which we know actually changes things. And it's about becoming aware of what we're really capable of and doing that. So we have lots of symptoms and everybody's focusing on symptoms, but it doesn't change who we are and it doesn't take us to a higher place.
So is this a variation of Gandhi's saying, be the change you want to see in the world? I mean, let's take Robert Steele, okay? Former Marine Corps infantry officer, former spy, badass in many ways, who has tried to become a good person. Obviously, I could be a great case study for you. Mm-hmm. So heal me, Olga. What next?
Well, I would go in and look at what some of your core beliefs are. I mean, all this stuff is subconscious. We don't know it's driving us, but we react. And one of the things that we're doing at the moment against all of this stuff is reacting to it. We're not actually looking at the world we want. We're reacting to the world that is descending upon us, seemingly beyond our control, but of our own unconscious making, and making it worse because we're not actually looking at the world we want and giving that energy. We're caught up in the drama, we're sharing how awful everything is, and we're not changing ourselves. So if I were working with you, Robert, or anybody else, I would look to see what was missing in your makeup. So ideally, when we in our formative years, we are ideally programmed with healthy self-worth, healthy self-acceptance, respect, good boundaries, understanding of what love really means, recognition, validation, all of these things. It's what I call our missing pieces. The things that we fail to get nurtured in us and cultivated in us in our formative years so that we are left incomplete, distorted, and many key aspects of the self are suppressed. In an ideal world, if we had all of those things expressed to us in a healthy way, we would know who we are, we would love who we are, and we would go forth in life expressing that and thriving. But that doesn't happen.
I think it's been a huge effort to break down the family. I think that one of the first decisions many parents face today is should they abort their child or not? And that's been enabled by governments and activists who are seeking to destroy the family. Then you have latchkey kids. And I'm seeing part of myself in all of this. You have kids going to boarding school. You have kids who don't see their parents. Both parents are working instead of a one-parent economy. You don't have pocket neighborhoods. You don't have multi-generational families. So I think essentially, from what I see, all the love has been designed out of the system for the last 50 years.
Well, yes, exactly. As I said, we have been dehumanized as a result of what I call the split. What happened way back then when we got indoctrinated, or our ancestors did, and we lost touch with who we really are, with nature particularly, with its healing powers, with its...
Okay, so Trump, you've got Trump's attention, and he's just made you Secretary for Health and Human Welfare. And your first order is fire 70% of these assholes. Your second order is fix America. What 7 things do you do to fix America?
It's about cultivating, having a culture of empowerment and self-responsibility. So bringing the people back to ownership of self. So we would look at how to do that and have training programs to show people how to reconnect with what they really are, to tap into their higher faculties, to understand the power of nature, to understand the nature of reality, how things really work, and to bring in consciousness and meditation and whatever else.
How do you change the schools?
Change the school, of course. The whole education system.
So let's just do schools, media, entertainment. What do you change in the? Well, actually, let's start with the family. Would Olga say that it ought to be a presidential initiative that everybody will be paid enough so that one-income families can come back into style?
Yes, I mean, you're talking logistics. I'm talking human dynamics and the power of the individual.
I'll tell you right now, and I don't mean to be rude, human dynamics ain't going anywhere in the next 4 years. However, there are 7 things I can do for this government in the next 4 years. And so I'm asking you, what 7 things will make it easier for Olga to then circulate her wisdom, okay?
Well, one of the things I would suggest is that we invert the chain of life, because right now the chain of life is upside down. So instead of having the planet at the top, planet first, people second, we have the economy and commercial profit at the top and everything else hanging down below that with the planet at the bottom. That's not sustainable. That's never going to work. It's not a viable way to live. So we need to make planet first, people second. When we do that, everything works. So that requires a huge shift across every level, education, the economy, everything. The economy unfolds naturally if we put the planet first and we think in terms of human excellence and relating to the planet in that way, making it a top priority.
And then that's also called true cost economics, which is one of the things that government colludes to conceal. I mean, Wall Street is not hiding the fact that it's stolen $100 trillion and it's laundered $100 trillion. And its biggest partner has been the Senate Banking Committee and the Department of Justice and the FBI. They're all RICO organizations in relation to how this has been done. So it sounds like you would want to change how the economy is managed. What do you mean by that?
I know that there is a way through this. I may not convey it in your terms, because what you're talking about is very much politics and logistics. And for me, politics at the moment, at least, is palliative care. It's not about empowering the people. What's required for empowerment is a desire to actually take back control of our lives. Here we are at the moment, we're faced with issues of autonomy, freedom, and health. Now, only we can reclaim those. So it's about understanding and working towards embodying those things ourselves, taking back responsibility by making personal choices in our lives that fit with that also support the planet. So it's everyday decisions. You're talking very big picture stuff. I'm bringing it down to the human level because that's where it changes. We have to bring it down to the human level and look at what we can do, the things we say yes and no to, the compromises we make in our own lives, the chaos we create through not being our true selves, and all of the fallout that comes from that, including poverty and divorce and debt.
Yeah, I mean, how do you deal with this? This fake pandemic has caused a massive increase in suicides, domestic abuse, and substance abuse. How do you deal with the 40 million people who are unemployed because a fake pandemic was contrived to wreck a $20 trillion economy? How do you deal with them?
Well, ideally, crises are a push to empowerment. That's what they're designed to do. We are meant to actually, with enough awareness, wake up to what's going on, see that we're being pushed to the absolute limit. And it reflects the depth of our programming, because how far do we have to be pushed before we push back? before we actually see what's going on and take charge and reclaim our autonomy. But we are so deep in fear and deference to these outside authorities because we've been taught to rely on them to fix things, and we've let them run things, and so we haven't taken responsibility. We haven't made personal choices that serve us. We want a doctor to give us a pill. We want fast foods. We want the convenience of a cell phone, even though it's killing babies and children and older people and affecting all of us. So we're not making choices that serve us at all. So it comes down to that individual level where we start making very different choices supported by a government that puts the planet first and supports us in making those decisions and teaches people how to do that.
Well, I'm sympathetic, but at this point, you're not at a mega level of change management. Most people are trapped in a house with a mortgage that's upside down. They've lost their job. They've got a stressed marriage. Their kids are in debt and have gotten really crappy educations. Colleges are graduating people now that know what high school graduates knew in the 1950s. I mean, the whole system's gone rotten. So what I'm trying to do is get you to give the president 7 bullets. What's 7 things? And I've outlined what my 7 bullets are. Let's shift. Let's move to one book. Which one book that you've written can people buy to get a grip on Olga without the taint of Robert Steele's being prickly?
Well, I believe we need a new story. I know we need a new narrative and not the official narrative, which is taking us down the tubes and to a point of robotization. So that's why I wrote a novel for a change. I normally write nonfiction, but I wrote a novel that is about... it takes down the wireless industry and brings in a completely benign zero EMF wireless telecom system that everybody can use, that cannot be patented.
Quantum telepathy.
Well, it's using gravitational fields, standing gravitational waves. And so this is very real. I know the scientist who invented it. I've seen it work. So we have very real solutions that can be brought into play. But the book is about inspiring people to higher things, to understanding that we can live very differently and to want it. Because the thing is, Robert, people don't want to change. They don't want to have to take responsibility. They're so fed up. They're so burnt out. They're so...
They've been dumbed down and drugged up by design. I mean, this is cultural Marxism at its best.
Yeah.
In fact, right before I spoke to you, I spoke to Sasha Stone, and he named the 8 things that Khrushchev said would happen in order to impose communism on the United States of America. And they included welfare and poverty and disease and police state, constant surveillance, all of this. So I think America is going to go into a major positive upward trajectory beginning on the 12th of February. But I'd like to know, if you were empowered to be in charge of rescuing the people in America, how would you go about it?
I would bring in empowerment programs. That's all that I could do at the personal level. I don't deal with symptoms. I deal with root cause. So I go to the dynamics. I go to what it is that's broken in the individual to create wholeness in the whole, if you like. That's the only way it's going to work, Robert, from the inside out. We've been trying from the outside in forever, trying to fix the symptoms, and it simply doesn't work. They've got so bad that, you're coming at me with this huge sort of list of terrible things, and I get it. We all want answers, but we want them to be given to us. We don't want to have to create them. We don't want to have to do them ourselves.
Do you have any appreciation for the Q phenomenon, or do you have any sense of whether people are waking up as they watch all of this horrible stuff happen to them?
Yes, I think they are. I think a lot of people are becoming aware of what's happening and are coming back into looking at things like quantum physics and consciousness. It's marginal still, but it is happening. And we're finally beginning to just get glimpses of what our ancestors knew and what we lost. So it's bringing ourselves back to that place. And it's a huge road. I agree with you. It's massive. It's daunting. But those who want to change can step up and do it. And there are very practical ways to do it. But we have to want it. Empowerment is not something that anybody can decree. A president can't say, okay, you've all got to get empowered now. This is the only way it's going to work. It doesn't work that way. We have to want a better world, and we have to be willing to be involved in making new choices and wiser, smarter choices in understanding ourselves, how we work, and then how we can generate the reality we want, each family unit or each individual at a time.
As you look at everything that's happened in the last 4 years, but since the election day in particular, do you have any sense that this is a WrestleMania drama? For example, I don't know if it's true or not, but some congressperson allegedly has tweeted out that Hunter Biden is going to be in charge of the Drug Enforcement Administration. I mean, that's like putting Hillary Clinton in charge of children's aid. So this is not pretty at all.
No.
And all of this stuff is piling up. And what I've been told is that the generals are actually waiting for 70 to 80% of all Americans to be awakened, not woke, not this politically correct crap, but literally wake up and want to be empowered. So if you were making a movie, or do you have a movie? Is there a video that you recommend?
Well, I've had bites of making a movie out of my novel. So I'm waiting to hear about that, in fact, and it would be a wonderful thing, because I think it would really lift people and give them something to aim for, and some very practical, real solutions to the way we live. You know, new foods, new ways of agriculture, all kinds of stuff, inventions that are actually very feasible.
So what do you think is going to happen in the next year? Are you feeling generally positive, or do you think we are still heading for the crisis getting worse?
I think it may get worse before it gets better. And as I said, it's a measure of how deep the programming is. How bad do things have to get before people will push back? I mean, you look around us right now, it looks like a new cult has developed. People are wearing masks. Even in their homes, they're wearing masks.
Well, even driving cars alone, they're wearing masks.
But you know, the fear, there is so much fear that has sent them into a corner, into submissiveness. They're not thinking clearly. They have no control over self anymore. They're not thinking critically. So, you know, that has to change. They have to get to the point where they're just so fed up with these restrictions being imposed on them that they just kind of explode. And that may be what's required. Because if we don't push back, we're just going to go under. So how bad does it have to get?
Yeah, I want to explore that theme a little bit more. If you were talking to the military dictator in the United States of America, who had the power to force everybody to listen to you for 3 minutes, what would you say?
I would say, what kind of world do you want? And what are you willing to do to get it, to create it in your own life, in your own circumstances, in your own sphere of influence? What life do you want? What world do you want? Because right now everybody's saying how awful the world is. All they're doing is sharing how bad it is, and it's getting worse. So what do you want? That's what I would ask people. The kind of world that you want, what does that look like? How do you think you can get there? What role are you willing to play in this? What are you willing to give up? Are you willing to be in alignment with the values that you claim to have? What new choices are you willing to make? You know, are you willing to really stand behind what you claim you want to have happen? Are you willing to give up plastics? You know, are you willing to make new choices in terms of health? Do you want to keep depending on a pharmaceutical industry? What do you want? You know, so few people are holding a vision of the world that they want or doing anything to work towards it. And that is what we must do. So it's a matter of wanting something better and being willing to work towards it.
Are there any communities in Canada or the United States or Ireland? I've actually thought about my exit strategy, except that I pissed off the Queen. So I have to be careful until Ireland is completely free. But Galway, Ireland looks very appealing to me. It's got a good university. I'm an offshore sailor. Galway, Ireland, and has Irish girls, you know, so this is good. Are there any communities that are representative of a happy space where people could actually go and seek to join those communities? I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that people need to abandon the cities And our founding fathers knew that cities were sources of disease and poverty and evil. And they destroy the family, they destroy the community, they do not serve the nation as opposed to the state. So if I were, and I'm not, because I'm okay, I'm well off, and my wife owns the house, and we don't lack for money. But if I were in desperate straits and I was prepared to just get in the car and drive until I found a happy space, which direction should I drive in?
Into the country. That's all I can say. I mean, we are being pushed to be much more self-sufficient, to get back to that autonomy that our ancestors had. So to be more in charge of our food, to be more in charge of our bodies. And here's part of what education would then be about from a very early age, being taught how our bodies work, how disease work, not so that we would not be ever taken in again at the idea that there is this deadly virus rampaging the world that's going to kill us. It's nonsense, but it's only because we are ignorant. It's not viruses that'll kill us, it's ignorance and denial. So I would be promoting that and saying, I am in the country now. I left Vancouver, which I loved, and went to the country in France. And, live in this old farmhouse with very thick walls that prevent the ambient radiation. And so far, it's a relatively healthy space. And we're learning to grow our own food. We're, filtering water, doing all kinds of stuff. And that's kind of what we're being challenged to do. As I said, when everything is stripped away, all we're left with is the self. That's what's happening right now. There's no government to protect us. There's nobody standing up for us. Our human rights are out the window. All of this stuff has been stripped away, just down to the self. We are left facing ourself. And so we have to depend on the self to be able to survive, to come back up, and to come from that place of autonomy where we are in charge of ourselves, understanding how the body works, how health works, how to create and maintain true health. And that's a learning curve. That's education right there. It should have happened. It should always have been that way, but it hasn't been.
That's pure gold. We finally got to where I wanted to get. That is pure gold. I'm deeply impressed. Okay. I've liked this very, very much. I'm not a sentimentalist, but you have reached me. And I think you've made a very good and strong case for people to listen to you and to listen to their own hearts.
Well, thank you, Robert. And that's what we've been missing, the connection to the heart, the humanity. It's really our humanity we need to get back. And I believe we can.
All right. God bless you, Olga. You're a credit to Ireland and Canada.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Olga, you and I had a very quick interview, and I completely agreed that 30 minutes was not enough time for the breadth and depth of your wisdom. And so we've agreed to do a second round, and this time we're going to focus on 7 things that would create the world we want. But you told me that you also wanted to make 3 points at the first. So why don't you do that?
Yes, thank you, Robert. I'd just like to sort of set the scene and give some context for these higher possibilities that we're going to explore. So first, here's the conundrum. Your programming is the very thing that gets in the way of you realizing that it's the very thing that's getting in your way. So we think we're thinking, but we we're usually just reacting because of programming. So that creates resistance to believing we can do extraordinary things. And it blinds us to our own greatness. So people may be cynical about creating an ideal world. They might see me as unrealistic, naive, clueless. But our world is meant to be ideal. We have that option. We have that potential. So I hold a vision of that. Secondly, we tend to look for systems. Something to protect us, to fix things, or even teach us how to make money. But that's kind of the old paradigm of focusing on external symptoms without addressing inner drivers. So the most important system is the human one. It's much more powerful, cost-effective and rewarding to activate the human operating system than to develop multiple costly systems for propping up a dysfunctional, disconnected human, which is what we've been doing, and it doesn't work. So lastly, a quick note about conflict and corruption. So our world is full of conflict. We have it in our personal lives, we have it in the world at large, we have it really all over the place. But external conflicts stem from a fundamental inner conflict. between who we've been programmed to think we are and who we truly are. Now, you could also call this corruption of our original blueprint. And, it can promote violence, crime, addiction, debt, depression, low self-worth, a lack of belief in self, reduced productivity and performance, and a need for someone else to bail us out. So here's the thing. We cannot prosper or be at peace if we are constantly at war with ourselves inside our heads. So my focus here is on reminding people of their greatness, their autonomy, and helping them activate that. So it's really about removing malware, restoring our default factory setting, and rebooting the species.
That's a very elegant way of putting it. Now, you've given me permission to use this document that you prepared for me, which I think is absolutely a wonderful document. And I'm just going to read the 7 things that will help create the world and then just ask you to talk about them one at a time.
Okay.
So, fix planet first, people second to restoring the natural order to the chain of life. I would say people first, planet second, but certainly not corporations and banks first. 2, create a culture and infrastructure for higher learning for all ages and in all schools. 3, dissolve the military-industrial complex and redirect dollars into bio-friendly, empowering programs for humanity. I agree. Plus, I would take down the big agriculture, big pharma, big finance, all of that, which is part of the cabal. Number 4, you say leadership for leaders, teaching citizens to become leaders in their own lives. Number 5, separate church and industry from state so government serves the people. I totally agree with that. In fact, I've been saying recently that both elected and appointed officials are being turned against the people by bribery, blackmail, and brainwashing. Number 6, promote a culture of creativity, innovation, artistic expression, and human excellence. And number 7, develop a love justice system that serves humanity. Now, having given those 7 things up front, I want to take as much time as you need to discuss each one in turn. So give us a little snapshot of put planet first.
Okay, so putting the planet first and people second, as I said, restores the natural order to what I call the chain of life. So when you've got the planet at the top and all else flowing from that, driving personal and political development, everything changes. And because we depend on the planet for our survival, if we do what's good for the planet, it's always going to be good for us. The other way around doesn't necessarily work. And we've been doing it that way anyway, doing what's good for the people, or more accurately, what's good for the economy, what's good for industry, commercial profit, basically. So I feel this is restoring the natural order that got disrupted and distorted, a long time ago. So coming back to how the planet really works, how we can serve that and then thrive.
I'm ready to buy into that, and I'd like to make the point to my viewers that true cost economics includes ecological and social costs, not just financial costs. And by putting the planet first, what you're really saying is we have to have ecological costs and also interspecies social costs as well as our own social costs. So this is very important. Now, on your second one, creating a culture and infrastructure for higher learning, that's an area of great interest to me. What do you have to say on that?
Well, perhaps in my first one, I could just add a little more, Robert, if I may, about, we can bring in all kinds of natural, innovative technologies. They are available and we can use them, and they haven't been used for commercial reasons. So, for example, healthy wireless telecom systems, natural energy sources, growing our own food, reconnecting with nature, using natural quantum or other technologies for healing, and converting plastics back into oil, cleaning up waterways with very advanced natural technologies. We can do all of these things, but I'd also like to see us cultivating eco-sharing and eco-excellence with and between.
Okay. I don't want to have your whole thing in one 30-minute thing, so let's move on. Go on to number 2.
Okay, so create a culture and infrastructure for higher learning for all ages and in schools, bringing in health and nutrition, understanding how the body and mind work. Because unless we do that, we cannot ever be free. If we don't understand how the body works or how to maintain or create health, we are always depending on an external force for that. So also teaching people how to make healthy choices and create healthy, enlightened relationships, and how to engage their higher faculties so that we can tap into universal intelligence to elevate our consciousness and, through the power of the mind and neuroscience and quantum physics, create the reality that we seek.
What about religious education?
Yes, replacing that with spirituality and humanness, because I feel that's a big piece.
Let me say this. Number one, I think most religions have been turned into control mechanisms, and they're a false god. And number two, I would add to this as a former spy and top reader that we also need to stop all programming activities, including malicious mind control, as well as entertainment, media, and other manipulation of people's feelings and emotions and so forth. So we need to detoxify the entire information and spiritual ecology. All right, number three, and we'll only focus on the military-industrial complex because that's what you're prepared to talk about.
Okay, it's about redirecting the huge amount of spending that goes into that into bio-friendly, empowering programs for humanity, becoming productive and creative versus destructive and defensive, because we cannot thrive if we're in a defensive mode. And we want to switch from that fear-based defensive destructive mode into collaborative creative regeneration. And when we become a force for good, we not only inspire others to follow, but we start generating very different outcomes. And that's its own kind of magic, which we can't really grasp until we start to do it.
One of the things I'd point out to you is that what we spend on the military is actually closer to $2 trillion a year in the United States. And we spend more than the next 10 countries combined. I would also point out that the U.S. military is not capable of winning a war, particularly a war far away from home against a peer competitor like China or Russia. It's not even certain we could defeat Iran, nor would I want us to be fighting with Iran. The second thing that I would say is that the military is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was designed to transfer wealth from the individual taxpayer to the banks. And so we're not doing true cost economics. So I absolutely completely endorse that. Let me also say that in my book, Reinventing National Security, I call for the closure of all 1,000 military bases overseas because they are lily pads for the smuggling of children, drugs, guns, gold, and so forth. Now, number four is one of my favorites, leadership for leaders. And I would start by saying we've taken civics out of our educational system. We're no longer teaching people how to be civic-minded. Instead, we're trying to force transgenderism and multiple forms of perversion into sexual education designed by deviants to create more deviants, which is a real problem for me. So talk to us about leadership in a spiritual way.
Well, yes, teaching citizens to become leaders in their own lives. I mean, it's the only way we can really ever have an empowered culture. No leader, no matter how fabulous, can, fix all our potential or all our personal problems. We can only do it from the inside out. And so if you have a leader who cultivates that, who themselves have recognized the power of the mind and done some of their own homework in transforming their negative beliefs and programming, then you're off to a very good start. So, it's about bringing back self-responsibility and autonomy. Taking responsibility for our choices, our environments, our actions, and then mentoring youth as well. And, I thought of creating local councils that are made up of all age groups, from the very young to the very old, with everybody contributing. And that's a wonderful dynamic to cultivate for collaboration within a community. I was also thinking of a system of community apprenticeship, so young people can learn a trade alongside a mentor and engage in skill and technology sharing. So we can potentiate global initiatives, and then people can also rehabilitate if they've lost their way in a much more caring, compassionate kind of environment.
I think that's utterly brilliant. In fact, for me, this is the heart of your vision. And I would like to say that I have often regretted my children all hated the Boy Scouts, and we now know the Boy Scouts has basically disbanded because it was penetrated by too many pedophiles. But one of the things the Boy Scouts did that I always thought was absolutely extraordinary was its merit badge handbooks. And I would love to see the Boy Scout handbooks adopted as an apprenticeship or as a diversity program. I'll also say that for a long time now, I've thought that national education needs to basically be year-round, but one of the 4 quarters should be apprenticeships to the trades in high school and apprenticeships to the professions in college. And finally, I really want to restore universal service with a shared boot camp, and then you choose between armed forces, Peace Corps, first responders, cyber warriors, and agriculture and family affairs. And we create new villages in the United States. I want to return most of the land west of the Mississippi from federal control to state control on a do no harm basis, and start creating massive new small farms. So I find this point number 4 of yours to be really the crux of the matter. Number 5, talk to us about church and industry being separated from the state. And let me just say up front that anybody that advocates Noahide laws for the Zionists or Sharia laws for the radical Islamists should be leaving the country on the first available transport. We will have separation of church and state in the United States of America.
Yeah. Well, as we said in our earlier discussion that religious constructs take us outside ourselves, and we're back there again when this happens. So what I see is that the current global crisis has become a platform for certain people to justify their religious beliefs, saying, God foretold this, and we told you this was coming, and you're ungodly people, and all of that. But I feel it's just another doorway into the disempowering doctrines that took us to this place, and it's creating more divisiveness and separating us from our spiritual self. So all of those religious constructs are man-made, they're debated with words, and they're very much head-based. Whereas spirituality is in all of us, and it's a heart-based, personal, private, intimate experience. So it's beyond words. And that unites us, connecting us with universal consciousness and with each other. So that's our own hotline to divine intelligence. And it can only be experienced by human beings being human. But I'd like to make a couple of points here, because there's some really tragic ironies that come out of this whole construct. And we've been so masterfully played that we cannot see what's going on. So it's why I tend to avoid constructs such as sin and evil, not because badness doesn't exist, of course, but because these concepts take us back into the disempowering doctrine, the way of thinking that brought us to this point. And it's caused, as I say, many tragic ironies. So here are just 3. So the religious constructs that some people would die for are the same brutally imposed constructs that our ancestors died to avoid. And they died with the truth, and we've been living with the lies ever since, using them to defend the very things that undermine our humanness. And the last one is, religious comforts have become like unwitting ambassadors for a doctrine that wiped out the ancestral wisdom that caused or that fostered the freedom, enlightenment, prosperity, and peace that we now so desperately need.
Well, I'm going to have to revise my call here. That's at least as important as your leadership point. I was thinking as you were talking, you've made me a convert. I was thinking as you were talking that this is probably the single most important interview I've ever done. This is really, really good. I consider this to be extraordinary, and I am so thrilled that you're articulating these points. I will say there's an excellent book called Caesar's Messiah, which promotes the idea that the Catholic Church was actually invented by Caesar as a massive psychological operation. Mm-hmm. And there are other books about Islam and Mormonism and so forth. And I think you're absolutely right about returning to Mother Earth and the wisdom of the ages and oral histories stamped down. And of course, that's all against the deep state, which is not nation states. It's actually the 12 families and the evil ones. So say one more thing quickly, and then we'll move on to number 6.
Okay, well, it was interesting that you talked about the deep state, because I would say our current state of programmed dehumanization is the real deep state that we need to address.
Well, I kind of agree with you, but you're not understanding deep state as a construct. There's deep state, which is basically the Rothschilds in the City of London, the Vatican, the Jesuits is the synagogue of Satan, the royal families led by the Queen of England, and then you've got the Freemasons, which at the highest levels appear to be sodomites and do some abusive things, while at the lower levels they're just good people trapped in a bad system. And then finally you have all of the secret intelligence agencies and the political parties as the shadow government that enables, that follows the orders of the deep state. What you're really talking about, I think, is the human sphere has been captured and corrupted and programmed to basically make us no better than chickens with no free will. And what you're really talking about is freeing the human spirit and restoring the human imagination. So let's move to number 6, which is all about the culture of creativity. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's indispensable. Like art and creativity are prime social catalysts, and they move us forward and they challenge us. And I think it's people have perhaps lost touch with their creativity, and as well as their imagination, their fun, their play, their lightness of being. And I think that's sorely missing now. Life has become terribly serious, and you know, we've got all of these human dramas and crises, and very real crises, you know, but it takes us out of that creative mode. As I said earlier, you know, we can't create if we're in a place of fear. And the same goes for the body. The body cannot regenerate if it's in a state of fear and defensiveness, which many people are in right now. So we really need that creativity, that innovation, that playfulness that creates an openness and cultivates deeper innovations, you know, higher thinking and huge, amazing inventions that we are very capable of. So there's a huge untapped potential there in terms of creativity.
I agree with you. There's an excellent book that a colleague, Carol Dumaine, brought to my attention called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. And it made a point that was repeated in John Gatto's book, Weapons of Mass Instruction, which is that we beat the creativity out of children by the time they're in the 4th grade. And one of the saddest things that I've seen as I've watched my 3 boys grow up and go through the school system is I've watched entire classes of children turn feral in the 7th grade. And then there's kind of the structure of programming, and it's just absolutely amazing to me. I think you've really identified the heart of human freedom. And I'll also point out that it's been documented over and over and over again that music and the arts increase the ability to do critical thinking, to connect dots, to do abstract reasoning, and so forth. So I'm totally a believer, and please do not let my emphasis on brevity, because we're speaking to the presidential level here. We don't have time for 90 minutes to say something that can be said in 9 minutes. Yep. So let's move on down to your number 7, and then I'll make some concluding remarks, but be assured, I consider this one of the most important interviews I've ever done in my life.
Thank you.
So tell us about number 7, a love justice system. And I'll just mention, what's her name? Marjorie, the presidential candidate that wrote the book, The Politics of Love. I hate missing her name because I gave it to the First Lady as a book to read, The Politics of Love. A very, very important book. So talk to us about a love justice system.
Well, yes, one that obviously serves humanity rather than corporate or commercial interests or people with the most money, you know, and the best lawyers. So I also thought, it's to bring it back to justice as opposed to smart lawyering. I mean, it's a very different way of working. And of course, we've gone down that rabbit hole of, you know, analysing juries and structuring things, manufacturing responses, in fact, and outcomes, which I think really goes against everything that justice should stand for. So one of the things that we could incorporate here, it's a very nice tribal system, is a process whereby offenders are supported by the community. They're taken in by the community, they're reminded of their goodness, their potential, their greatness, and they're given constructive choices for rehabilitation. So it puts the onus back on the individual again. It's reminding them of their autonomy and the outcomes of their choices. And, you know, being involved in a community actually serves, promotes, and supports them.
I agree with you, and I want to make a point as a former spy and as a top reader of nonfiction literature, is that a lot of the evil that we need to help people get away from has actually been designed into the system. And so you can't fix your deep state without taking down my deep state. So, on that note, let me ask you for concluding remarks.
Well, I would say that it's the other way around. I think that when we focus on addressing the deep state in humans, that things will change. There won't be a tolerance for that anymore. Those things will fall away if enough people are embracing their true state, their true humanity, and not tolerating this kind of stuff anymore. So, the programming happens when we're so young that we don't even know we've been programmed, and it happens before we're told what to think, not how to think. So it's about coming back to how to think and learning that as a crucial piece that will help us to move forward in a way that's in alignment with our humanity, rather than all of this stuff on the outside, and rather than catering to the symptoms and then losing ourselves, as you said, that's happening with so many young people. So,
You have my absolute respect, and you have got my attention, which is very, very hard to get. Uh, I am impressed, deeply, deeply impressed. I want to end with you telling our audience one place where they can go to connect with you.
well, they can go to my website. There are lots of resources there that will actually help them. So it's just olgasheean.com.
Olga, I have to end this, but I just want to say to you, and I mean this sincerely, and in some ways I'm trying to make up for my brusqueness, but I'm putting 4 movies together and I don't have a lot of time. I think you're one of the most significant people it's been my privilege to talk to since I started doing interviews, and I salute you, madam.
Wow. Thank you, Robert. I'm honored.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
That was very good.